I guess early November you were in Japan.
Yeah, I was back in Japan in November. I wasn't there for Daito Kenichi, I was there for some training, although there was some sword stuff, and Chuck told me if I didn't talk about it, he would throw me out of the club. So that's why I'm here. But yeah, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Michael Shane. I've been a member of the club for 6 or 7 years. In addition to collecting and studying, I teach Japanese swordsmanship in Brooklyn. And so that was the focus of my trip to Japan in November, but that'll be the third part. First, I'll show you a little bit of the sword stuff, and we'll talk through that. The main focus will come on the third part of this. So, part one is Tokyo, then Yokohama, and then Doragawa. So in Tokyo, that was the beginning of my trip. Mostly I was doing some sword study with Mike Yamasaki that many of you know. And so this is just a little bit of some of the swords that we got to see, just to share it. Amazing, best blades I've ever seen in my life. So we got to see things like O Kanehira. This one, this Sanjo was incredible. This was definitively owned by Toyotomi Hideyoshi. It was amazing to hold this blade. And then Masamune, I'd seen one in person, but I'd never gotten to hold one. So that was incredible. There's just nothing quite like it when you see a good one in person. Got to see a Musashi Suba that I'm kicking myself for not buying because they were sold at Daito Kenichi a couple days later. But this was an incredible example. It was amazing to see it and to hold it in person. And then so I was also able to visit lots of sword shops because I was there to train. So this is Token Hataya, which is in Machida, which is outside of Tokyo. This sword is actually run by Hataya Sensei, who's the head of the Zen Nihon Toyama-ryu Iaido Renmei, which is the organization that my dojo and my style is a part of. He runs a sword shop, and so it's always a necessary stop. It's amazing to go to Japan and you can walk into sword shops, especially ones that cater to martial artists, and the variety of blades is just incredible. So after hanging out in Tokyo for a couple of days and looking at ridiculous swords, then I went to Yokohama, and I was there primarily for the Taikai of the International Batodo Federation, which I'll talk about in a moment, but got to do some other great things like visiting the forge of Satoshi Hitoshi. He's an interesting guy. He's kind of a maverick. He refuses to work with the NYTK, so he makes his own Tamahagane. He's a bit of a renegade, a real character, so it was really neat to sort of watch him work a bit and get up close and personal with the tools. And I had never been to a working forge before, so that was amazing. Here he is talking about the structure that he prefers to use with his blades. He does a lot of work for martial artists, so he likes to talk about how strong his blades are and how difficult they are to bend. And then we had the Taikai, which was primarily in Yokohama. So the International Batodo Federation is one of the large sword organizations in Japan and around the world. They're focused on Nakamura Ryu, which is a style of swordsmanship created by Nakamura Taisabura Sensei. And so we had some pre-Taikai training in the Yokohama Budokan, which is pretty new. It's not that old. It's an amazing building. It's beautiful. It was an amazing place to practice. We also did some keiko at the Tsurumi Chugako, which is the middle school, and it's just a gym, but it's actually a really special place because this has been the main dojo of Nakamura Ryu, the home dojo, the Honmu dojo, for 50 years. It's just in the middle school gym, which is pretty incredible to go there and to get to train with everybody. So this is from the actual Taikai. For those of you that don't know, Taikai is basically a big tournament. They're usually annual, so there's all sorts of different events. There's kata, there's temeshigiri, which is test cutting, there's paired forms. It's a long day, it's a lot of fun. People from all over the world come. There are demonstrations, dignitaries from like the local government are there. It's a really big event. I was fortunate enough to win a medal in temeshigiri, which is test cutting. This is the group. This isn't my dojo from Brooklyn. This is a dojo from London, UK. This is my teacher in the middle, who I'll talk about in a bit. So that's a dojo that I'm also associated with. And it was great. It was, this was the first one in a while because of the pandemic, so everybody was really happy to be together. And it was a fantastic training opportunity. So I promised I do pick on the first two parts, because this is sort of the real academic portion of the lecture, which is what we did after the Taikai, which was a retreat to focus on some of the advanced practices that we work on specifically with that dojo in London. So first thing I want to say is I'm not a practicing Buddhist in a religious sense. So everything that I'm about to talk about for me is a vehicle for my martial arts practice. And you can sort of think of it as 1,000-year-old exercise science that still works. So we have blades in here today that have Buddhist imagery prevalent on them. We see them all over the place. But what I want to talk about is how might the imagery on these blades connect to the actual practices of martial artists that might have carried them, assuming they were a martial artist and not something like a merchant. So thanks, Marcus, for the photos. This is an example of a kurikara, which is the dragon wrapping around the ken. Here's another style of kurikara, and then also fudomyo, that we'll talk about in a moment. So these are really, really common at varying levels of quality on the blades. But they weren't it wasn't just about religion, which is what I'm going to talk about here. So the style of swordsmanship that I practice, in addition to the main style we teach in our dojo, is kurikara ryu heiho. And that is, it's not a koryu, it's a syncretic school of swordsmanship that's got roots in Shugendo and Mikyo, which is esoteric Buddhism. And so the curriculum of kurikara ryu is not a collection of martial techniques the way it is in koryu, where there's a catalog of dozens or hundreds or even more techniques for specific situations. It's more of a comprehensive system of internal and external development for the swordsman. So here's fudomyo holding the kurikara. So this is the man who was in the center of the picture. That's John Evans Sensei. He's a Kyoshi 7th Dan in Nakamoto Ryu, and he teaches kurikara ryu, which he studied when he was living in Japan, which is where he started training with Nakamoto Sensei. So that's the connection. I just wanted to introduce him. So this is a mandala. And this mandala shows 9 seed syllables, or bijun, and each of these represent one of the 9 guardian deities in Shingon Buddhism. 8 of the deities are associated with either the yin or the yang channel in the 4 limbs. So every limb, 2 legs, 2 arms, has a yin channel and a yang channel, and that's how you get up to 8 deities. And in the center, in the tanden, or the hara, or the dantian, if you're on the Chinese side, is where fudomyo resides. And fudo means firm, immovable, and that's why fudomyo is at the center, because he's sitting at the center, coordinating what all the limbs are doing in swordsmanship. The 5 elements, which describe the progression of the swordsman and their capabilities, are also represented. And these are the same 5 elements that Musashi used when he organized the Book of 5 Rings. So, for example, we've got earth, and I'm going to talk through sort of the martial concept here. So in earth, which is the first element, the foundation, the body moves and then pulls the sword, and then the sword is grounded again. This is the most basic way of moving with the sword. And each of these elements, as I talk through them, are cumulative. So as you progress, you have to be able to maintain the sort of intrinsic quality of all the elements that came before in your movement with the sword. Next is water. And this is where you start to add fluidity and adaptability to your movement. And so with water, the focus is on the sword moving and taking the body with it fluidly. And then your mind and the body are sort of receptive participants in what the sword is driving. So you've got earth, water, then you have fire. Fire is where the body and the sword explode apart or together. It's instantaneous. You'll see this in a lot of quick turning or switching movements, but you have to develop the foundation of earth and the fluidity of the water element before you can really move to fire. Then you go to air. Here, you start to develop the ability to sort of improvise. Your movements become more extemporaneous, so the body is weightless. The mind and the sword are working together, and it's not really clear what's in charge, except that the body is almost not even there. And then finally, you have void, ku, or space. And here, this is sort of the highest level of attainment. Maybe you get there, maybe you don't. The idea is that you conceive of the movement and it takes place outside of time. It's instantaneous, it's invisible, it's indescribable. This is, if we could see Miyamoto Musashi fight with a sword today, this is probably what we would see theoretically. Each limb is also connected to a pair of dragons. So on this in this drawing, the mandala, there's one dragon. But if you actually had all 8 dragons, you wouldn't be able to see anything else. So that's why there's one dragon which represents all 8. So as I said, each limb has a yin channel and a yang channel. The yin is sort of the inside, it's gentle, it's nurturing, and the yang is on the outside and around the back, and that's sort of the more overt power. And so each limb has a yin and a yang channel, and each channel has a dragon. And together, these are the 8 dragon kings, the Hachidai Ryuo. And this is sort of where all of this starts to come together, because this mandala is basically a representation of total integration of the limbs and the mind with the center, and that's the essence of true swordsmanship. So the idea is, as you move through this progression, you have the intellectual brain and you have the brain in the tanden, and the goal is to have the brain in the tanden subsume the intellectual brain, and everything moves down, and everything then becomes fully integrated. Here's a representation of the Hachidai Ryuo. So the mandala that I showed you and the 8 great dragon kings, these are one example of how religious ideas migrated from India to China and then to Japan. And this same path is really apparent in the pedagogy of some Japanese internal practices and martial arts. And as I said, Kurikara-ryu, the system that I study, is really a progressive systematic system for cultivating that energy and making the ideas represented in that mandala practically and physically accessible to someone wielding the sword. And the Hachidai Ryuo, specifically the 8 great dragon kings, play an important role in the advanced practices of Kurikara-ryu, and that's what we were studying in Doragawa specifically. So Doragawa is a small village. It's located at the foot of Mount Omine, which is the birthplace of Shugendo. So this is a very important place for Shugendo. It's beautiful. It's along the banks of a river. It was really a wonderful place to be. And so from May to September, the village is packed with pilgrims and people from all over the world who are Shugendo practitioners who come there to study, to practice, to worship, to do their pilgrimage. In November, when we were there, totally deserted, which was awesome. I mean, the village is empty in the colder months, and that's really the perfect atmosphere for the kind of training that we were doing. So just across the river is Ryusenji Temple. It's right at the trailhead for going up Mount Omine, and this temple in particular focuses on the 8 great dragon kings. And it's gorgeous. It was really amazing to be there and to train there. It was phenomenal. So, Inno Gyoja is the founder of Shugendo, and legend says he came down from Mount Omine to the banks of the Doragawa River, and he found a spring there, and he enshrined the 8 great dragon kings. Doragawa, basically, there's running water everywhere, all over the village. There's taps built into the ground and the earth and you know, the side of the mountain, because it's all built up around a spring. So here's another shot of the river. Here, this is on the grounds of the temple, and you can see here sort of a representation of the dragons and the limbs in this statue. So our training began on the first day with cold water immersion, which is suigyo, and that's a ritual of purification or misogi. So it's November, it's like 40 degrees outside, it's been that way for months. We're wearing nothing but, you know, plain white cotton gi and pants, and so we go into the pond and kneel down, and the water sort of comes up to your chest, and one of the priests from the temple does his thing. But this takes place after a couple hours of pretty intense training in the morning, specifically to prepare us for that experience. So here's an example of some of what that looks like. So each day revolved around the tanren, which is the conditioning curriculum of Kurikara-ryu. And so the kanji here for tanren are the exact same as what we use when we talk about making a sword. Like, so in that sense, it revolves to, it refers to the application of heat and pressure to expel impurities, right? And so these practices have a lot of overlap, for example, with Hatha Yoga from India. There's some overlap with Qigong from China, which in Japanese is Kiko. And this is sort of one side of the Kurikaru-ryu curriculum that, as you can see, doesn't really involve the sword. But it's an essential part of the practice and an essential part of these rituals and training. So we also studied the Dharani, the chants, for the Hachidai-ryu, which we used during various practices and training throughout the week. So this is probably difficult to read from where you're sitting, but what this chart shows you is each limb, the yin or the yang channel, the element that's associated with that limb, and then which of the 8 dragon kings is associated with that limb. And then Furomyo sits at the center. And so depending on what we were doing, we would use a specific Dharani and a specific focus to try to, put the purpose of the training and the focus in a specific place in the body so that we could perceive different things and open up different possibilities. In addition to the Tanren and regular sort of sword practice, we hiked up the mountain, we practiced riding bungee. So obviously you can't train all day, every day, but each day revolves around a specific rhythm. Early in the morning at sunrise was Tanren, the intensive conditioning. Then there'd be breakfast. In the afternoon there'd be sword practice. The diet was very, very strict because we were sort of working towards all week Takigyo, which is waterfall training. And so this is the waterfall at Ryusenji Temple. It is extremely, extremely cold. And in order to do Takigyo safely, you have to prepare properly because the water's so cold and it's really not a good idea to do it if you don't have the right supervision. So the diet was very particular, and this is really what we were building up towards throughout the week. And it was an incredible experience. I can't wait to go back. And it was really, it was just amazing. It was really a privilege to get to do it and to be there at the temple. So after Takigyo, then we got to experience the Goma, the Shingon Buddhist fire ceremony, which they did specifically for our dojo. So we'll just listen to some audio from the actual fire ceremony, which not a lot of people get to experience on the inside. Sometimes you can see it happening inside the shrine from the outside, or you can hear it, but to be there was really amazing. Might be the Heart Sutra. Yeah. Right. So they start with the Heart Sutra, and then they go to Jigunju, for Furomyo. So anyway, that was my trip. It was really great, and if you have any questions, let me know. Yeah.
Is that you on the picture?
Where?
The picture.
Oh, yeah, yes, that was me. Yeah, that's the Kujaku, the peacock, which is also found in yoga. It's called Mayurasana. But once if you're doing it in a yoga class, it's going to be spoken about and taught and emphasized in one way. But if you're doing it in the pursuit of Japanese swordsmanship or through Kurikaru-ryu, the focus is a little bit different, and it occupies a different place in the curriculum pedagogically. So a lot of these ideas originated in India. That's basically as far back as it goes, and then they wound their way through China, and then eventually they made their way to Japan, and now it's a bit of a mixture. And this mixture is very prevalent in Mikyo and Shugendo practices. You can really pick them out and sort of trace things back. It's really interesting. Any question? Yeah?
Yeah, I may have missed it. What's the rigorous diet?
So when we were there, the diet was vegetarian, and when you do the practices like the peacock, all of the Tanren, the conditioning curriculum, you have to be completely empty. So your stomach has to be empty, your bowels have to be empty, you can have nothing inside. Otherwise, one, it's less effective, and two, there can be problems because it's a lot of breath work. There's a lot of abdominal locks and vacuums and holding practice. So essentially, you ate very little after lunchtime. The main thing was to be empty in the morning and to eat super, super clean. So vegetarian, rice, miso soup, maybe some eggs, very little to eat at night. The main thing was to be empty and clean in the morning so that the training was effective and safe.
So it sounds like you were starved.
Not really. The crazy thing is I felt great. I wasn't hungry. But I think part of that was a reflection of the time and the place, because it's much more difficult to maintain that diet here.
And that enabled you to tolerate that super cold water?
Well, it helps. I mean, it's something you build up to. So leading up to this, and still today, I regularly, at the end of my shower, I yank it all the way to cold and stay there for a couple of minutes. And in the winter in New York, my shower will get down to 42, 44 degrees. In the summer, it's less effective. It's like 60 degrees, which is not really cold enough. So you try to condition yourself and build up to it. But the Tanren practice in the morning, for example, before Takigyo, before the waterfall training, specific things were emphasized to help make that more effective and safer. And when you are experienced with the Tanren, you generate heat. When I was in the water, kneeling at the beginning for the first blessing in the pond, it was pretty incredible because my whole center felt extremely warm. I was really, really comfortable, but that was after a couple of hours of training in the morning. Yeah.
How long did you stay in the pond?
The pond, maybe 5 or 7 minutes. Yeah.
How long was the overall training?
So the whole trip was about 2 weeks. The Doragawa portion, everything I just talked about, that was about a week at the end. And Tokyo and the Taikai was the first week. Yeah.
And your style of swordmanship, how much of it is some of it's based on yoga type practices, and some of it's based on actual jiu-jitsu? What's the percentage of the way? At what point in your training does one start doing the other?
Yeah, so ideally you're doing all of it all the time, because the conditioning practice sort of undergirds everything, right? Now you focus on different types of conditioning as you move through the curriculum, right? You don't do the peacock right away, for example. You have to build up to it systematically. One of the things that sets Kurikara-ryu apart and is uncommon in Japan is its systematic approach to the cultivation of the internal practices. In Chinese martial arts, the internal cultivation is very systematic, and it's pretty consistently systematic. However, in Japan, for whatever reason, the pedagogy around internal practices is not systematic, and it's actually very difficult to find high-quality training or practice of this kind in Japan because it's difficult for it to survive when it's not systematized. So over time, it sort of gets diluted and watered down, and it starts to fade away. So the point of the conditioning is that it's everyone all the time, and it sort of never stops. But where you focus changes. For example, as you move through the progression of the elements, the things that you're practicing change to support whatever it is you need to be focusing on at that time. But it's pretty constant. Yeah. Yes, Marcus.
In geographical terms, how you get to Mount Omine from Tokyo?
Yeah, so a series of smaller and smaller and older trains, basically. You literally start with the Shinkansen, and by the end you're on like a one-car train that looks like it might fall apart. But because it's Japan, you put it in Google Maps and it tells you exactly what to do, and it's amazing. But yeah, it's incredible that you know, the very last step is a bus. That I can tell you, right? And the bus sort of winds, you know, back and forth up this mountain for you. But yeah, you can do it all on public transportation, which was great. Yeah.
Congratulations with winning the medal.
Oh, thanks.
Did you have to bring your sword with you? And if so, how was the traveling with the sword?
So I could have, but I didn't want to deal with the headache. And since it was a taikai, I knew there would be plenty of swords up to borrow from Japanese members. So when I got there, I held a couple and just picked one, and that was the sword that I used.
Luckily, it was the right one.
Yeah. I mean, so I took my Mogito, my unsharpened sword, my boken, but I just didn't want to deal with the police and obviously if I took my sharp blade, I would have to then register it and then deregister it and get somebody to ship it back to me, and it's a whole thing. So if I can avoid it, I just borrow a sword. Yeah.
Is there gendais?
For practice, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're all Shinsakudo or Gendai blades. And, yeah, because in Japan, everybody that's doing martial arts has to use a traditionally made sword. I mean, unless they're, operating in the gray market or they're a little bit on the other side of the law. But essentially, everybody's using traditionally made blades. They're just modern blades made with martial artists in mind. And so, they're not art by any stretch of the imagination. Any other questions? Yeah, Chuck.
Michael, I believe there's a taikai coming up in the month of June.
Yeah, there is. So the U.S. Federation of Batodo is putting on a taikai in June 10th and 11th. The 10th is the day of seminars and training, so if it's open to the public, you can come and watch training, and there'll be embu, there'll be demos. Chuck is actually, assuming he's not going to back out, he's going to help me. We're going to put up a table with swords and fittings and do a little talk at the end of the day for people. I'll do the talking, Chuck, you don't have to talk, because I know you don't want to do that. So that'll be the first one here in the Northeast, actually, since 2019 because of COVID, so everybody's really looking forward to that. And there'll be, so this taikai in Japan, now that the pandemic is under control or over, is going to happen every year now, and things will hopefully get back to their normal schedule.
Where is it going to be?
Where?
Yeah.
Which one?
The one that's coming up in the U.S.
Here?
Yeah.
So it'll be in Fort Lee, New Jersey. Yeah. Yeah.
I'll send out the information.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're curious about what the practices look like, my dojo is called Zentokan Dojo. You can just go to brooklynbatodo.com, BATTODO. We have an Instagram account. We have all that kind of stuff, so you can see what it looks like, some of what we do. But yeah, primarily we teach Toyama Ryu Batodo, which is a Gendai style of swordsmanship that was developed for the Japanese army, and I study Kurikara Ryu, this other system, sort of alongside it, and they're very complementary. And so I don't teach everything of what you saw, what I talked about here. I don't teach all of that in my dojo. I teach some of it, but some of it is just for my training with Evan Sensei. So, any other questions?
Michael, thank you very much.
Thanks.